The silence behind the curtained night was quiet except for the soft hum of the stage lights. Sandra Bullock stood in front of the mirror, fixing her hair for the charity event she had agreed to attend. Her reflection showed a calm, confident woman, but inside, her heart was restless. Fame, success, and applause filled her life, yet there was an ache she could not explain. Somewhere between the lights and the loneliness, she had lost something real. Across the crowded ballroom, a man stood quietly in the shadows. He wore a simple black suit, his posture calm, his eyes steady. It was KeanuReeves. No one noticed him. He didn't want them to. His presence was gentle, almost invisible, yet filled with unspoken weight. He had come not for the cameras or the attention, but for something, or someone, he had kept in his heart for years. When Sandra walked on stage to speak, her smile was warm, sincere. Keanu watched her, and in that moment, he saw everything she tried to hide behind that smile. The exhaustion, the longing, the quiet sadness that only someone who had lived through loss could recognize. He knew that feeling too well. He had carried it for decades. People often said time heals. Keanu knew it didn't. Time only taught you how to live with the pain. He had promised himself never to cross paths with her again, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. After Speed and the lake house, they had gone their separate ways. Life had taken them down different roads, but fate, quiet and stubborn, had other plans. As the event ended, Sandra stepped outside into the cool night air. The laughter and music faded behind her. She needed a moment alone. The garden was empty, or so she thought. She stood by the fountain, looking at her reflection in the water, unaware that someone was standing a few steps away, watching her with quiet reverence. Keanu's heart raced, yet his face remained calm. Years of self-control had taught him how to hide storms behind silence. He watched her breathe, the way her shoulders rose and fell, the way she wiped a tear quickly before anyone could see. He wanted to walk up to her, to say something, anything, but words failed him. He had written letters before, letters he never sent, letters where he spoke to her about life, grief, kindness, and all the moments he wished he could share. But every time, he folded them, placed them in a wooden box, and left them sealed. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was respect, maybe it was both. A sudden sound broke the stillness, the faint rustle of leaves. Sandra turned quickly, startled. Her eyes met his. For a moment, the world stopped. Her lips parted slightly, unsure whether she was seeing a memory or reality. "Keanu?" she whispered. He smiled softly, the kind of smile that held both joy and sorrow. "Hey, Sandra," he said quietly, his voice calm, almost fragile. There was silence between them, filled with years of unspoken words. Then she laughed, a nervous, gentle laugh. "You scared me," she said. "I didn't think anyone was out here. I didn't mean to," he replied, his tone warm but distant. "I just needed a moment to." She nodded, and for a second, neither of them moved. The air between them was heavy, yet peaceful. It was the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, Sandra asked, "How long have you been here tonight?" Keanu hesitated. "Long enough," he said softly. "Long enough to remember why I came." Her brow furrowed slightly. "And why did you come?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in years, his eyes revealed the truth he had been hiding behind kindness and humility. "Because sometimes," he said, "you spend half your life watching someone shine, and the other half wishing you could tell them how much their light helped you survive." The words hit her heart like a quiet storm. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was stand there, stunned, as he slowly stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Sandra," he said softly. Turning away, she wanted to call after him, to ask what he meant, to tell him not to walk away, but her voice froze in her throat. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her with the echo of his words and a feeling she couldn't name. That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his voice in her mind, his calm eyes, the way he said her name as if it meant something sacred. And she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She missed him, but what she didn't know was that this encounter was only the beginning. *. The letter she was never meant to find next morning. Sandra woke up with her mind still tangled in the memory of his voice. She tried to brush it off, to convince herself it was just nostalgia. But it wasn't. There was something deeper about the way Keanu had looked at her, like he saw the parts of her no one else noticed. It was unsettling and comforting all at once. As she made coffee, her assistant called to remind her of a delivery. "It's from the foundation," she said. "Someone dropped off a box for you. No sender name." Sandra frowned. A box. When it arrived, she opened it carefully. Inside was a simple wooden box, old, carved with care. There was no note, no signature, just a faint scent of cedar and thyme. She lifted the lid and found several folded letters tied together with a thin black ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly as she untied it. The first letter began with just 2 words, "Dear Sandra." Her breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable, calm, steady, gentle. It was Keanu's. She hesitated before reading, afraid of what she might find, but curiosity won. There are things we never say because we think time will give us another chance. But time isn't generous. It just teaches us what we lost. You once told me that kindness is the only real power we have. I never forgot that. When my world went quiet, it was your laughter that helped me remember there was still light. She stopped reading, tears filling her eyes. Every word felt like a whisper from the past. There were 5 more letters in the box, each one dated years apart. One from the time they shot the lake house, one from after her divorce, and another after she lost someone close. Somehow, he had known when she was hurting, even when they hadn't spoken in years. How had he kept all this to himself? She sat on the floor, reading each letter slowly. The last one was dated just a month ago. "If one day our paths cross again, I hope I find the courage to tell you what I never could. That some souls recognize each other long before the mind catches up. And if I never get the chance, just know that your kindness saved me more times than you'll ever know." Her tears fell silently. She closed the box, holding it to her chest as if it could steady her heartbeat. She didn't know whether to call him, thank him, or stay silent out of respect for what he'd kept private for so long. That evening, Sandra went to the balcony of her home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold. She held the last letter in her hand and whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me, Keanu?" Miles away, in a small cafe tucked behind a bookstore, Keanu sat alone with his notebook. He wasn't writing tonight, just staring out the window at the rain. There was peace in his solitude, but it wasn't the kind that came from contentment. It was the kind you learn to live with when you've chosen to protect someone. By keeping your distance, his friend and longtime photographer, Michael, walked in and sat across from him. "I heard you went to the gala," Michael said, raising an eyebrow. "Saw her." Keanu nodded slightly. For a moment, and Michael pressed. Keanu smiled faintly. "And nothing. I said good night." Michael sighed. "Man, you've been writing letters to her for years, but you won't even tell her?" Keanu looked down at his coffee. "Some things are better left in silence," he said softly. "She deserves peace, not the weight of my feelings." Michael shook his head. "You always talk about kindness, but sometimes kindness is honesty." Keanu didn't respond. He knew his friend was right, but life had taught him that love wasn't always about claiming someone. Sometimes it was about standing quietly behind them, making sure they never fall. The next day, Sandra made a decision. She couldn't ignore the letters, not after reading words that had clearly been written from a place of love and truth. She found the courage to drive to the small art exhibit where she knew he sometimes volunteered, under a different name, helping children paint and find peace through art. She had seen it once in a magazine years ago. When she walked into the studio, the smell of paint and wood filled the air. Children laughed as they drew, their joy echoing off the walls. In the corner, Keanu sat with a little boy, helping him carve a tiny wooden bird. His expression was calm, patient, full of care. He didn't see her at first. She stood quietly, watching him the same way he had once watched her, with admiration and awe. Then, slowly, he turned his head and froze. Their eyes met again, but this time, there was no shadow between them. He stood up, setting the carving knife aside. "Sandra," he said softly. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. "I found your letters." His expression shifted, surprise, worry, and then quiet acceptance. He didn't ask how. He didn't deny it. He simply nodded. You weren't supposed to. He whispered. I know, she replied, her voice trembling. But I'm glad I did. The room fell silent around them. Children's laughter faded into the background as they stood in the middle of the art studio, face to face with years of unspoken truth. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Sandra asked, What happens now, Keanu? His eyes softened, filled with the kind of pain that comes from love held too long in silence. I don't know, he said quietly, but maybe it's time I finally stop watching from a distance. The moment that changed everything. The art studio grew quiet as their eyes met, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Sandra could hear the faint sounds of children laughing in the next room. But here, in the small space filled with paintbrushes and sketches, time seemed to stop. Keanu stood there, still holding the wooden carving he'd been helping the boy make. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything he had kept hidden for so long. You weren't supposed to see those letters, he said softly again, almost like a confession. Maybe not, Sandra replied, her voice steady but fragile. But I did, and I think maybe I was meant to. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet sigh, he placed the carving down and motioned toward a bench near the window. Sit with me. She nodded. They sat side by side, the sunlight slipping through the glass, dust floating in the air between them. Neither of them spoke for a while. It was as if both were afraid to break the delicate peace hanging in the room. Finally, Sandra whispered, Why did you keep all that inside, Keanu? Why didn't you ever tell me? He smiled faintly, his eyes distant. Because sometimes honesty feels selfish, he said. You had your own life, your family, your career. I didn't want to disturb that. I just wanted to be grateful you existed. His words were quiet, but they carried a weight that settled deep in her heart. Grateful I existed? She repeated softly. He nodded. You once told me that everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. You said that during the lake house interviews. It stuck with me. When I lost people I loved, when life got heavy, I kept remembering your words. You made kindness sound like strength, and I needed that reminder more times than I can count. Sandra blinked away tears. Keanu, I didn't know. He smiled gently. You weren't supposed to. You were just supposed to live. That was enough for me. She looked at him, her voice trembling. But don't you see? You were part of my strength too. Every time I saw how you handled pain with quiet grace, how you treated everyone the same. You reminded me that fame doesn't have to take away humanity. Keanu looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. You give me too much credit. No, she said, shaking her head. I don't give you enough. Their eyes met again. And in that moment, there was something raw, something pure between them, an understanding built over years of silence. Before either could speak again, the little boy from earlier ran up to them, holding the wooden bird Keanu had helped him carve. Mr. K, the boy said, smiling, look, it's done. Keanu smiled warmly, taking the bird in his hand. You did amazing, buddy. He handed it back gently. Keep it safe, okay? The boy nodded proudly and ran off again. Sandra watched the exchange with quiet admiration. Mr. K, she asked with a soft smile. He shrugged shyly. Just something the kids call me. I help out here sometimes. It keeps me grounded. You're still the same, she said softly. The same man who fixes broken things quietly, without asking for attention. He smiled faintly, then turned to her. And you're still the same woman who brings light into every room she walks into, even when she doesn't believe she has any left. Her heart ached at his words. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered. It makes it harder to pretend it doesn't matter. Maybe it's time we stop pretending. He said gently. The truth in his voice left her speechless. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. There was something magnetic, something vulnerable in his eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel it fully. But before either could say more, a voice called from across the studio. It was the foundation director. Keanu, the reporters from the art charity event are here. They're asking for a statement. He sighed softly, his calm mask slipping back on. I'll be there in a moment, he said, then turned to Sandra. Come with me. She nodded slowly, They walked together to the front room, where cameras and reporters waited. Sandra stayed to the side as Keanu spoke, humble, simple words about hope, kindness, and giving children a voice. But what struck her wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. There was no ego, no performance, just truth. When it was over, one of the reporters turned to her, surprised to see her there. "Ms. Bullock, we didn't expect you." She smiled awkwardly. "I didn't expect me either," she replied, glancing at Keanu. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, the two of them side by side again after years apart. The picture spread across the internet within hours. Fans went wild. Headlines flooded every corner of social media. Keanu and Sandra reunited, secret project, or rekindled friendship. But behind the noise, behind the attention neither of them wanted, something real had begun to stir. That night, Sandra sat by her window, scrolling through the photos that everyone was posting. She paused on one, Keanu looking at her with quiet affection, unaware the camera had caught him. And for the first time, she whispered to herself, maybe this isn't the end of the story. Miles away, Keanu sat at his desk, the same wooden box beside him. He opened it slowly, took out a blank page, and began to write again, not another letter to hide, but one he hoped she'd finally read. Sometimes we think silence protects what we love, but maybe silence just delays the truth that could have set us free. He looked at the words, then smiled softly. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself, "I'll tell her everything." The truth he could no longer hid. The morning sun painted Los Angeles in soft gold. For the first time in years, Keanu woke up feeling both nervous and alive. He had decided that today would be the day he finally told Sandra everything. The truth he had kept buried under silence and respect for too long. He sat at his small wooden desk, looking at the half-finished letter from last night. His handwriting trembled slightly, not because of doubt, but because his heart was finally ready to speak. He whispered the words as he wrote them. "Dear Sandra, I once believed love was best kept quiet. That distance protected the things we hold sacred. But silence has a way of becoming a cage, and I don't want to live inside it anymore. If you let me, I'd like to tell you what's been in my heart all these years." He placed the letter in his jacket pocket, took a deep breath, and left his apartment. Meanwhile, Sandra sat in her kitchen, her phone buzzing non-stop. Headlines about their reunion filled every feed. Keanu and Sandra spotted together, old friends or something more. She sighed and turned the phone face down. Fame was always loud, but the moments that mattered most were quiet. As she poured her coffee, she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart skipped. When she opened it, Keanu was standing there. Simple clothes, no cameras, no crowd, just him. "Morning," he said gently. "Morning," she replied, surprised but smiling. "You're early. Couldn't sleep," he said, his eyes kind but serious. "May I come in?" She nodded and stepped aside. He walked in, looking around at the small, warm space filled with books, photos, and quiet memories. It felt like her, simple, real, alive. For a while, neither spoke. He sat on the couch, she across from him. The air was thick with anticipation. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said softly. "The press, the pictures, they've been calling non-stop." He smiled faintly. "They always do. We can't stop that, but we can decide what's real between us." She tilted her head slightly. "And what is real between us, Keanu?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter. His hand trembled slightly as he handed it to her. "This is what's real." She looked at the envelope, her name written in his familiar handwriting. She hesitated before opening it. As her eyes scanned the words, silence filled the room again. He watched her, every emotion flickering across her face: surprise, sadness, warmth, and something else he couldn't quite name. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy. "Keanu," she whispered, "why did you wait so long?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because I was afraid," he said honestly. "Afraid of losing a friendship that meant more to me than love itself. Afraid that my feelings would make things complicated for you. And maybe, afraid you didn't feel the same." She set the letter down, her voice trembling. "You think I didn't feel it too?" He froze, his heart stopping for a second. "What?" "Do you think I never felt something when you were around?" she said, her voice growing softer. "I just didn't know what it was. I thought it was admiration, respect. Maybe it was both. But there was always something more." He looked at her in disbelief, the truth slowly sinking in. "When we worked together," she continued, "I always knew there was something between us that words couldn't explain. But we were young. We were careful. And then life happened. People, work, distance. It all came between us." Keanu took a slow breath. "And now," she smiled sadly, "now I think we're both still figuring it out." The room went quiet again. But this time it was a gentle kind of silence, one that didn't hide pain, but promised peace. Then, just as he was about to speak, her phone buzzed loudly on the table. She ignored it once, twice, but it kept ringing. Finally, she glanced down. The caller ID read Press Agency. Keanu stood. "You should answer." "I'll go." "No," she said quickly, standing too. "Stay." He stopped, looking at her. Her voice trembled slightly as she added, "Please." He sat back down, and she silenced the phone. The world outside could wait. "You've spent your life taking care of everyone," he said softly. "Helping, healing, giving. When do you let someone take care of you?" Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want to fall. "I don't know how," she whispered. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers before gently touching her fingers. "Maybe you don't have to know," he said. "Maybe you just have to let it happen." Her heart raced. Their hands stayed there, not holding, not forcing, just touching enough to remind them both that something real still lived between them. And then, before either could speak, a flash of light came through the window. A camera. Someone had found them. Reporters shouted from outside, calling their names. Double quotes. "Ms. Bullock. Mr. Reeves. Are you together?" She flinched. Keanu stood quickly, his calm voice steady. "Stay here," he said. "I'll handle it." He stepped outside, facing the chaos of flashing lights and noise. His voice, though quiet, carried strength. "We're not a story," he said firmly. "We're just people trying to live our lives." But the cameras didn't stop. Questions kept flying. Back inside, Sandra watched from the window, her heart heavy, her eyes full of admiration. The man she had once thought unreachable was standing there, protecting her again, not with fame or force, but with dignity. And in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. As the reporters shouted his name, Keanu turned his head slightly toward the window. Their eyes met through the glass. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." He smiled faintly, then whispered something she couldn't hear but felt in her soul. "Always." The world that wouldn't stay quiet. Following morning, Sandra woke to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop. Her publicist, her manager, her friends, everyone wanted to know the same thing. "What's going on between you and KeanuReeves?" She sighed deeply, staring at the endless headlines flashing on the screen. Caught together again, rekindled romance, or secret project. It was everywhere. Photos of them at her house. Him stepping outside to calm the reporters. The look they'd shared through the window. She turned off the phone, sat on the edge of her bed, and whispered to herself, "Why can't the world let people just be?" Across the city, Keanu was facing the same noise. His assistant had called early, warning him that his private charity work was now trending. "Everyone's talking about you too," she said. "Even the talk shows." He rubbed his temples, calm but exhausted. He never chased attention. In fact, he had built his whole life on avoiding it. But this time, it wasn't just his privacy at stake. It was hers too. He called her. She picked up on the first ring. "You okay?" He asked gently. "I've had better mornings," she said, her tone light but weary. "You?" "Same." There was silence for a few seconds. Then she said quietly, "We can't ignore this, Keanu. They won't stop until they have a story. Then we tell the truth," he said calmly. "And what is the truth?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "The truth is that you've been one of the few people who ever really understood me. That's all they need to know." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," he said. "We don't owe them more than that." Later that day, Sandra agreed to do a short interview for a charity promotion. She knew they would ask about him, but she was ready. When the interviewer gently brought it up, she smiled and said, "Keanu's one of the kindest souls I've ever met." Sometimes people just reconnect at the right time, not for headlines, but for healing. Her honesty silenced the room. Watching from home, Keanu smiled softly. It was just like her, graceful, real, strong. But not everyone saw it that way. The internet started spinning stories, secret love letters, quiet reunion. The one that got away, they made it dramatic, as if love could only exist when exaggerated. That evening, Sandra decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. She drove to Keanu's place, ignoring the cameras outside. When he opened the door, she looked tired but determined. "We need to talk," she said. He nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the small apartment felt warm and calm. Books, guitars, art. It was simple, peaceful. She sat down, took a deep breath, and said, "I can't keep hiding behind polite words. You wrote to me about honesty, about not staying silent. Maybe it's time I learned from you." He looked at her gently. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes. "I mean, I need to tell you what I should have said years ago." His breath caught. "Sandra." "No, let me say it," she interrupted softly. "You wrote that my light helped you survive. But what you don't know is that your silence saved me too. Every time the world became too loud, I'd think of you, of your calm, your kindness. You made me believe that not all good men vanish when the cameras turn off." He looked away, fighting emotion. "You give me too much credit again. Maybe," she said with a small smile. "But I've never been wrong about you." There was a long pause. Then, slowly, she added, "When I read your last letter, I realized something. I don't want to just be the person you watch from a distance. I want to be someone you walk beside." His eyes softened. "Are you sure?" He whispered. "You know what comes with me, the noise, the attention, the ghosts." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "We both have ghosts. Maybe it's time they meet." He laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that only comes from surprise and relief mixed together. "You always know how to say the right thing." "No," she said. "I just finally stopped pretending I didn't want to." They sat there in silence for a while, hands still touching. The air around them was peaceful, almost sacred. After some time, she said softly, "Do you remember the line from the lake house?" He smiled, "The one about waiting 2 years for someone who's worth it." She nodded. "Maybe we just waited a little longer." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe." Just then, thunder rolled outside, the first sign of a coming storm. Raindrops began to hit the window. He stood and offered her a hand. "Stay until it passes?" "I think I will," she said. The rain grew heavier, and they moved to the balcony, watching the city blur under silver water. For the first time, there were no cameras, no expectations, just two people, standing quietly under the sound of rain. "I used to think love was a loud thing," she said softly. "But maybe it's this, quiet, patient, and real." Keanu looked at her, rain running down his face, and said, "It's always been this," and in that simple truth, the years of silence finally melted away. But neither of them knew that someone had filmed that very moment from the street below. A single clip that, within hours, would make the world see the truth they had just begun to understand. The world finally understood. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it still lingered in Sandra's mind. She woke the next morning in Keanu's apartment, the soft scent of coffee filling the air. For the first time in years, she felt calm. No noise, no pressure, just peace. Keanu was in the kitchen, quietly pouring 2 mugs of coffee. When he saw her awake, he smiled. That gentle smile that always seemed to hold 1,000 unsaid things. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice still sleepy but warm. "It's been a long time since I woke up feeling." "Still," he nodded. "Maybe that's what we've both been missing, stillness." They sat together at the small kitchen table. No rush to go anywhere. He told her about the art program, how he had been teaching kids who had lost their parents, how carving would help them find peace. She listened quietly, watching the way his hands moved as he spoke. Then her phone buzzed. She frowned, glancing at the screen. Dozens of missed calls, messages, and notifications. "Oh," she murmured. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" She opened one of the messages, and her breath caught. "Someone filmed us last night," she whispered. "We're all over the internet." Keanu stayed quiet, reaching for his phone. Sure enough, the video was everywhere. A clip of them standing on the balcony, laughing under the rain, his voice faintly audible saying, "It's always been this," millions of views. Comments flooding in, "This is love. Pure, finally. Something real." Sandra leaned back, covering her face with her hands. "I can't believe this." But Keanu just smiled gently. "You know what's strange," he said. "For once, I don't mind them seeing the truth." She looked up at him, surprised. "We've spent half our lives hiding from what's real," he continued. "Maybe now the world needs to see that love doesn't have to be perfect, just honest." His calmness made her smile despite the chaos. "You always find peace in storms, don't you?" He shrugged. "You taught me that storms don't last forever." That afternoon, calls came from studios, agencies, and talk shows. Everyone wanted them to appear together. They refused all but one, a short live charity segment for the Children's Foundation. Where it had all begun, on the day of the event, the world tuned in. Cameras flashed, crowds gathered, but this time, neither of them hid. Sandra stood beside Keanu as they spoke about kindness, giving, and how love can be expressed through action, not just words. When the host smiled and said, "People are calling you to the example of real connection in Hollywood," Sandra looked at Keanu, then back at the camera. "Real connection isn't about fame," she said. "It's about being seen for who you are, and still being loved anyway." Keanu nodded, his voice calm but firm. "And sometimes, it takes a long time to find that person. But when you do, you don't let fear or silence steal it away." The audience clapped softly, but the look between them said more than applause ever could. After the cameras turned off, they stepped outside into the quiet garden behind the studio. The air smelled like rain again. Sandra smiled. "Seems like the weather follows us." Keanu chuckled. "Or maybe it's trying to remind us of that night." She looked at him, her eyes warm and steady. "I'm glad you spoke my name that night, Keanu. I didn't know I needed to hear it until you said it." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I almost didn't. I thought silence was safer." "It was," she said softly. "But love was braver." They stood there for a long moment, just breathing the same air, hearts steady. The noise of the world fading behind them. Then, from across the garden, one of the children from the art program ran toward them. The same boy who had once carved the wooden bird. He held it in his small hands, smiling brightly. "Mr. Ms. Bullock," he said, "look, I painted it." The bird was now bright blue with a red heart on its chest. Keanu crouched down and smiled. "You made it beautiful." The boy nodded proudly. "It's not just a bird anymore," he said. "It's hope." Keanu looked up at Sandra. She smiled through tears. "He's right," she whispered. And as the boy ran off again, they stayed there, two souls who had finally stopped running, surrounded by laughter, light, and the kind of love that didn't need to be shouted to be real. That night, Sandra wrote one last letter, not to keep, but to give. "Dear Keanu, thank you for teaching me that love isn't about time or distance. It's about kindness, honesty, and courage. Thank you for watching when I didn't see, for waiting when I didn't know, and for speaking when silence had become too heavy. You were never just watching. You were healing." She left it on his table, sealed with a small wooden bird beside it. When Keanu found it, he smiled, that quiet, gentle smile that had started it all. He looked out the window, at the calm city under starlight, and whispered to himself. She finally wrote back. And somewhere in that silence, the world that once watched from a distance finally understood. Love doesn't need noise. It only needs truth.